Minnesota Department of Human Services Background Studies. Net Study 2.0 Onboarding Definitions and SIP Structure. This video outlines the onboarding process the Minnesota Department of Human Services Background Studies Division will use to onboard entities into Net Study 2.0. For a written transcript of this training video, select Show Transcript from the YouTube menu. For subtitles, select the closed captions or settings icon. Now with the housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. We will begin your onboarding experience by giving a brief explanation of the Net Study 2.0 system. Net Study 2.0 is the Department of Human Services, DHS, Background Studies, BGS, Background Study Checking System. Net Study 2.0 is designed to enhance protection of children and vulnerable adults by improving the accuracy of background studies through fingerprint-based criminal record checks. The learning objectives for this video are to define commonly used Net Study 2.0 terms, highlight and identify key steps in the onboarding process, define the authorized agent's role, and define the sensitive information person or SIP's role. There are several terms used throughout this video and the onboarding materials where a definition may be useful to you. An entity is any facility, program, organization, or agency initiating background studies under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 245C. This includes, but is not limited to, programs licensed by the Minnesota Department of Human Services, DHS, or the Minnesota Department of Health, MDH, programs serving children or youth licensed by the Minnesota Department of Corrections, DOC, unlicensed personal care provider organizations, PCA choice programs, supplemental nursing service agencies, personnel agencies, educational programs, and professional service agencies. An authorized agent is the controlling individual designated by the license holder who is responsible for communicating with the Commissioner of Human Services on all matters related to Minnesota Statutes, Chapter 245A, and on whom service of all notices and orders must be made. A sensitive information person, also called a SIP, is a person that is designated to receive sensitive background information and is capable of determining, upon request of DHS, whether a background study subject is providing direct contact services in one or more of the license holder's programs or services, and if so, at which location or locations. And a study subject is a person for whom a background study is required or completed. Once your entity has received approval for account access or an application has been submitted for a license or registration which requires your entity to submit DHS background studies, the person designated as the authorized agent will receive an email to start the onboarding process. It's good to know that all updates and notifications for your entity are emailed to the SIP, so it is important to keep the SIP's email address up to date in Net Study 2.0. If your SIP's contact information is not kept up to date, your entity's background studies may be delayed. First, your entity will determine how to structure their SIP, or SIPs, in Net Study 2.0. For organizations with multiple entities, the Net Study 2.0 system offers flexibility in how background study determinations of workers and volunteers may apply to your organization. The authorized agent is responsible to designate the sensitive information person or persons for each entity under their license or registration by using the Net Study 2.0 New Account Access tool. One person may be the SIP for one entity, more than one entity, or all entities under one license or registration. However, there can only be one SIP for each entity. Let's review 3 diagrams to illustrate this structure. Under Option 1, a single SIP is responsible for all entities under an organization's structure. Here, The organization's authorized agent or agents designated a single person as the SIP for each of their 4 entities. In this example, a single SIP is responsible for all entities under the organization structure. To illustrate how this structure affects an organization's ability to transfer employees across its entities, let's examine which of the 4 entities that an employee with a cleared background study, like Zuri, could provide services for without each of the 4 entities having to submit a new background study. Entity 1 submitted the background study for Zuri, so Zuri can work for Entity 1. Zuri could also work for Entity 2, Entity 3, and Entity 4. Thus, with one SIP for all the organization's entities, Zuri may provide services at any one of the organization's 4 entities. The ability to apply a background study determination to other entities under the same SIP is permitted under certain circumstances provided in law. Please review the NetStudy 2.0 User Manual for more information. Under Option 2, the organization's authorized agent or agents selected a different sensitive information person for each of the organization's 4 entities. To illustrate how Option 2 affects an organization's ability to transfer employees across its entities, let's examine which of the 4 entities that an employee with a cleared background study like Zuri could provide services for. Entity 1 submitted the background study for Zuri, so they can work for Entity 1. However, Entity 2 has a different sensitive information person from Entity 1. Thus, Zuri could not work for Entity 2 unless Entity 2 initiated a new background study for Zuri. Similarly, because Entity 3 and 4 each have a different sensitive information person from the entity that submitted the background study, Zuri could not work for either Entity 3 or Entity 4 unless those entities initiated a new background study for them. With this structure, a person with a cleared background study may only provide services at the entity where the background study was submitted. In order to provide services at any of the organization's other entities, a new background study would be required for each entity where the person would be providing services. Option 3 is a combination of Options 1 and 2. Under Option 3, the organization's authorized agent or agents designated one SIP for multiple entities while designating a single SIP for other entities. To illustrate how Option 3 affects an organization's ability to transfer employees across its entities, let's examine which of the 4 entities that an employee with a cleared background study, like Zuri, could provide services for. Entity 1 submitted the background study for Zuri, so Zuri can work for Entity 1. Because Entity 2 has the same SIP as Entity 1, Zuri could also provide services for Entity 2. However, Entity 3 and 4 each have a different sensitive information person from the entity that submitted the background study. Thus, Zuri could not work for either Entity 3 or Entity 4. With this structure, a person with a cleared background study may only provide services at the entity with the same SIP. In order to provide services at an entity with a different SIP, a new background study would be required for that entity. NetStudy 2.0 Onboarding New Account Access Tool. After your entity decides the SIP structure, the authorized agent will receive an email including a link to the NetStudy 2.0 New Account Access Tool. This tool is completed by the authorized agent who attests to the NetStudy 2.0 user agreement and designates the SIP or SIPs. The authorized agent will read the background study authorized agent NetStudy 2.0 user agreement, select the checkbox at the bottom of the screen, and type their full name to electronically sign the agreement and agree to the statements. Select Next to proceed to the authorized agent SIP designation page. After the authorized agent reviews their duties and responsibilities, they will review the expectations for an entity's sensitive information person and complete the authorized agent SIP designation. It is important that the authorized agent understands these responsibilities and expectations before designating a SIP or SIPs for their organization's entities. The authorized agent must electronically sign and attest that they understand and are responsible for the authorized agent requirements and are accountable for the actions of the person or persons designated as a sensitive information person in NetStudy 2.0. The authorized agent must enter the name and email address for the SIP or SIPs. If the authorized agent is associated with more than one entity and will be designating different SIPs for its entities, the authorized agent must create multiple SIP records by selecting the Add SIP button. Section B will display a list of all of the entities that the authorized agent is associated with, along with a drop-down for each entity under the designation column. The drop-down will include all of the SIP records created in Section A. The authorized agent must select a SIP from the drop-down for each entity listed. The authorized agent finalizes the SIP selections by selecting the Submit button. After the authorized agent submits the SIP designations in the NetStudy 2.0 New Account Access tool, the authorized agent receipt is created and an email is sent to each SIP designated by the authorized agent in Section B. The email includes a link labeled "Click this link to log into the NetStudy 2.0 New Account Access tool." The SIP must complete this portion before the entity will receive access to NetStudy 2.0. After selecting the link, the SIP will be directed to the SIP form. At the top of the SIP form, there are directions to complete the NetStudy 2.0 user agreement. Statement 1 of the user agreement includes all of the entities for which they have been designated as the SIP. In addition, the duties and responsibilities of a sensitive information person are included. The sensitive information person will read the background study sensitive information person NetStudy 2.0 user agreement, select the checkbox at the bottom of the screen, and type their full name to electronically sign the agreement and agree to the statements. Then select the Submit button. The SIP must electronically sign and attest that they will carry out the duties and responsibilities of the sensitive information person in NetStudy 2.0. After the SIP submits the background study sensitive information person NetStudy 2.0 user agreement in the NetStudy 2.0 New Account Access tool, the authorized agent and the SIP will receive a New Account Access tool receipt with the organization's SIP designations and an electronically signed and timestamped copy of the NetStudy 2.0 user agreement. Within 24 hours, each SIP that completes the SIP designation process will receive an email containing a system-generated password and a link to the NetStudy 2.0 system if they are a new system user. The SIP's username will be their email address. By selecting the link, the SIP will be directed to NetStudy 2.0. If the SIP has an existing user account, the entity in which you just completed onboarding will be added to their existing account. At this point, the onboarding process is complete, and your entity has a NetStudy 2.0 account and may begin submitting background studies in the system. This concludes the video on onboarding. Thank you for your interest in this portion of NetStudy 2.0. Additional information is available in NetStudy 2.0 User Manual. To access the manual, select the Help link in the upper right-hand corner of NetStudy 2.0, then select the NetStudy 2.0 User Manual link to open it in a new tab.
Copyright 2022. State of Minnesota, Department of Human Services. Produced by Minnesota Department of Human Services. 444 Lafayette Road, St. Paul, Minnesota 55155. 651-431-2000. Toll free 800-657-3663. Toll free TTY 800-627-3529. Video phone 651-964-1514. Website https://mn.gov/DHS/. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, DHS, prohibits discrimination in its public services because of race, color, creed, religion, political beliefs, national origin, sex, public assistance status, marital status, age, sexual orientation, or disability. Direct discrimination complaints to the DHS Civil Rights Coordinator at dhs.info@state.mn.us or 651-431-2000. Individuals with disabilities may request reasonable modifications to receive DHS services by contacting its Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator at DHS_ADA@state.mn.us or 651-431-3040.